So, what is Angular Universal and why does it matter? Well, if you build an Angular app, a standard Angular app, as we did it many times in this course, you get a client-side app because Angular is a client-side JavaScript framework, which simply means that the code you write in the end runs in the browser. And whilst this has some advantages, for example, giving a user this great user experience of instant responses and high application reactivity, this also has some potential disadvantages. Running your code only in the browser gives you some potential disadvantages. Most importantly, it impacts search engine optimization. You have no or almost no search engine optimization when building Angular apps just like that, because web search crawlers, like the Google crawler, can't really see the content of your website. They basically see an empty page. And you can actually see this when building an Angular app, and attached you find a very simple Angular app, which has simply two routes between which we can switch. If you run such an Angular app, or simply a brand new Angular app generated with ng-new, then you as a human user, of course, see some content on the screen. But if you right click onto this page and you view the page source code, here for example in Google Chrome, you will essentially see an empty page. There are some JavaScript imports here at the bottom of this page, but when it comes to the main content in the body, it's just this empty app root element. And this is actually the content web search crawlers would see. Because the actual visible content on the screen, like this text here or these links, all this is added by Angular after this page was loaded. All this content here is displayed because of browser-side JavaScript code being executed. Because all this content here is of course displayed due to our Angular components and their templates and the logic in those components. But all that logic and all these templates of course belong to this Angular app and therefore to the Angular code our app consists of, and therefore all this content in the end depends on our Angular code being executed. And as mentioned, that happens in the browser. Therefore, the actual page that's being downloaded from the server is almost empty. It just contains these script imports, which then will actually load and execute the scripts that will populate the page. But that only happens after the page has been loaded. Web search crawlers don't necessarily wait for these scripts to be executed though, and that's why those crawlers might just see an almost empty page. And that's why search engine optimization is impacted when using just Angular, because web search crawlers don't really see a lot. So this can be a pretty big disadvantage, but it is of course worth noting that it's not necessarily a disadvantage for all Angular apps. If you're building some application that requires user authentication anyways, it might, for example, not really matter because search engines wouldn't be able to authenticate anyways. If you're building some company internal application, it also might not matter. But for some applications, it might matter, and then having just an Angular app could be a disadvantage. Another potential disadvantage is that you can have a slow page load. Especially if you're on a slow network or on a slow device, loading the page and displaying content on the page can take some time because all this JavaScript code must be downloaded before something's rendered to the screen. And therefore, users in slow networks or on slow devices might not see the content of your website very quickly. This is also something you can simulate. Here in the Chrome DevTools, you can go to the Performance tab, and there you can, for example, throttle this a little bit and throttle your CPU and the network to simulate a slow machine and a slow network. And if you then reload this page here and you empty the cache and so on, you will note that this really takes some time here. We start with this empty page now, whilst all these files are being downloaded. And once they are downloaded, then they will be executed and it will take a bit longer until something's on the screen. Now here I'm doing this all in development mode, which is why these files are all super big and not optimized at all. These are not the sizes these files will have in production, but still you can see the general problem. It's just an even bigger problem here in development mode. Ultimately though, at some point of time, everything will have been downloaded and the app will be rendered. But as you can tell, this really took some time here. Again though, just because it's really important, this will be faster if you would be building this app for production, because these JavaScript bundles would be optimized for that then and would be way smaller. Nonetheless, it in general can be a problem. For the moment, I will get rid of that throttling though. But we do have these disadvantages or potential disadvantages, and it's exactly these kinds of problems Angular Universal helps us get rid of. Because Angular Universal simply is an extra package, you could say, some extra settings, some extra features we add to our Angular app that actually add some server-side functionality to the app. To be precise, with Angular Universal enabled, or to be precise, with your Angular app being transformed to an Angular Universal app, you get the best of both worlds. You still have a client-side single-page application once the Angular app was downloaded from the server, but the very first page that's loaded by a user will actually be pre-rendered on the server, which simply means that the finished page will be served to the user, and the user, or web search crawler, therefore doesn't have to wait for the JavaScript code to be downloaded and executed to see something on the screen. But it's really just this first initial page load. Subsequent navigations on the page and so on will still be handled by Angular on the client side. So you still have that single page application, just with this extra optimization for the first page load. So now that we know what Angular Universal is, we can add it to our project. And again here, I have a very simple starting project. You find it attached to the previous lecture. It's a very simple Angular app with 2 routes. Here using Angular modules, but you could also use Angular Universal if you were using standalone components. And to add Angular Universal and to convert this application to an Angular Universal application, you just have to run one simple command. And that command is ngadd nguniversal, written like this, one word, /express engine. If you run this command, you will be asked whether you want to continue, or you might be asked whether you want to continue, and then it will install some extra packages, create some extra files, and update some existing files. Now, for example, it updates the app routing module TS file here in my case, because it adds this extra setting to the router, which is required for the Angular router to work correctly in an Angular Universal app. You can also learn about that if you hover over this initial navigation setting here, because there you see that this value is required for server-side rendering to work, and now with Angular Universal we are using server-side rendering. That's why this setting conveniently was added automatically here. In addition, this brand new app server module TS file was added here for me. And it's a very simple Angular module that was added here, which, most importantly, imports the server module, which is provided by the Angular team, so which is part of the Angular library or Angular framework in the end. And this also is required to make Angular Universal work correctly. We also got a main server TS file, which in the end just exports this app server module though, so really not too fancy. And then we got some TypeScript settings, some extra settings in AngularJSON, some extra scripts we can execute in the end. And most importantly, we got this server TS file here. And this server.ts file now contains some Node.js and Express code. And Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that can be used for running JavaScript code outside of the browser. So, for example, on a server. And Express simply is a framework for Node.js that makes building server-side applications a breeze. And in this server TS file, such a Express-powered server-side application is built with help of Node.js and TypeScript and certain Angular features. But we'll take a closer look at this file and see this in action in the next lecture.